new literatures, what is new literatures, right? And which is appropriate term, whether post-colonial literature, Commonwealth literature, new literatures. We were trying to see the problems or the problematic nature of the term Commonwealth literature and how it progressed towards new literatures and post-colonial literatures, right? And you were able to understand the background or the each term and what it means actually, right? So it is good to understand it before we get into the course. And new literatures one is what I'll be handling. And you have selections from Australian literature and Canadian literature. So I used to give a brief outline of Canada and the Canadian literature, a kind of introduction to Canada and Canadian literature before we get into the select Canadian texts which are prescribed for study. So let us try to understand Canada today. Okay. What comes to your mind when I say Canada? What do you know about Canada? What do you think of Canada as a country, right? You can share with me. What do you remember? Ice, yeah. Snow, ice. Can you see the PPT?
Yes, sir.
Canada is known for its landscape, beautiful scenic landscape, extremes of climate, especially it is most of the parts of Canada are cold, extreme cold, biting cold, we say, right? And it snow falls, it's snowy most of the period. Then summer is maybe for 1 or 2 months, okay, maximum 2 months. Summer, even there are varieties of climate you can see. Maybe as we go into the component, I'll explain more about the climatic conditions and the landscape features, the flora and right, the types of trees, and you have a leaf, right, in the Canadian map. So, which tree? Can you say the name of the tree? What's the name of the tree in the Canadian flag?
Maple tree, sir.
Maple tree, right? Good. That's good. Maple tree. And when I talk about places like Australia, Canada, even if you think of a place, a surrounding, just your immediate surrounding, you can see some unique features of that landscape, the flora, fauna, and the culture, right, associated with that landscape. Have you related, maybe have you related with your immediate environment? Have you tried to relate? Right? And there's a concept called naturally defined areas. It has its own distinct flora, fauna, soil, climate, rivers, lakes, right? Climatic conditions and the human cultures that has evolved in communion with that particular landscape. So if you take in India, there are many bioregions. If you take Australia, there are many bioregions. If you take Canada, there are many bioregions, maybe a few kilometers, I would say. See, a good example I would say is Thinai, right? Have you heard of Thinai? The Thinai landscape, right? We talk about the various types of Thinai. Can you name those things? 5 types of
குறிஞ்சி
Thinai.
திணை, முல்லை திணை, நெய்தல் திணை, பாலை திணை.
Well,
I forgot one திணை, sir. மருத
மருதம்.
திணை, sir.
what's your name? Please, what's
Sir,
your
என்ன
name?
ஐஸ்வர்யா? ஐஸ்வர்யா, sir.
Aishwarya. Good, good, Aishwarya. Neidal, Mardam, Palai,
முல்லை, குறிஞ்சி, sir.
then Kurunji. Mullai, Neidal, Palai, Kurunji. Maybe if you have studied in detail, you know that there are specific the profession of these people, the culture of these people is different, right? And what they eat and the gods they worship, right? And the animals and plants of that particular region, everything is described in detail, right? So that is maybe I would say the Tamils lived with the bioregional consciousness. The Tamils lived with the bioregional consciousness in ancient societies. But we have lost the bioregional consciousness. We don't care about our immediate surroundings, right? We care about, or we know more about River Thames than River Vaigai, right? Or River Kaveri. We talk about daffodils which we have not seen, but we don't talk about our own flowers, right? Like Mallipu or Mullaipu, right? There are many indigenous flowers which we don't know about, or we don't know much about it and the history of it and its associations in various cultural practices as well. But we know very much about other things which we have not much experienced, right? But we should know about our immediate environment. This lack of local knowledge is the main reason for ecological crisis, I would say, because we don't own our land. We don't have that identity, knowledge, right? Do you know how Trichy was or Madurai was over thousands years before? What's the flora and fauna? Yeah, right. So if you study that, you will know how the landscape has been changed by various factors, the political, economic, social, and cultural factors, how they have changed it over a period of time. And colonialism is an important factor, I would say. They just uh, maybe they dominated, they replaced the landscape as well, the flora and fauna. They introduced new species which is not suitable to our climatic conditions, to our landscape. They introduced the introduction of sheep, for example, in Australia, in Canada, in colonized countries, in the colonies of various countries, has destroyed the landscape in a very, very sensitive way. Maybe you're not aware of that. Right? For example, I would say the aborigines. So aborigines generally is a term which is referred to the natives of a particular country. This example is the aborigines of Australia. You know about the Australian landscape. It's a dry landscape, and these white people, they don't know how to tap water from that landscape, but aborigines have a special knowledge. Even from a dry bush landscape, they know how to tap water, right? And there are water holes which these people, the indigenous people, are aware of. And what these introducing the new species like a sheep, maybe it has destroyed the water holes. Okay, the sheep destroyed the water holes of the aborigines. So see how just introducing a new species from somewhere, right? You know the distinct flora and fauna of Australia, right? Okay, but the British people have brought their own species along there. It is part of the colonialism process, and that has disturbed the ecological balance in a way. So we can think a lot about, maybe you can make a separate study like this, thinking about how each species had a great impact on the particular bioregion of a country, right? A bioregion of a particular place, how it was maybe uh, the integrity of that space That region was disturbed because of introducing new species. See, nature has given a lot of variety for us. We are trying to play with it and destroy that variety. So, just an insight into the bioregion. Can you see the map? So, what I'm trying to say is we have to be aware of our bioregion, and there is so much of loss of this bioregion, and we need to protect at least the few bioregions that are still remaining here and there. Okay, we should try to protect it. Can you see the Canadian map here?
Yes, sir.
Mm, it's a big landmass. The country maybe, I think it's the second largest country in the world, right? With regard to the landmass, it is in the north of the equator, so it is so cold, and you can see most of the major cities are in the southern side, and the north is mostly uninhabited. Maybe a few places you can see here and there, but people, as they move farther towards the north, the climatic conditions are extreme, right? Extreme, biting cold. So Canada is a vast country with a small population. The population approximately of 30 million. Canada is larger than China with a population smaller than that of Ethiopia. So the fertile soil, lakes, rivers, and you have to understand this 40% of Canadian landmass is mostly covered by Precambrian rocks. Precambrian rocks is a type of ancient rock which was there over a billion of years ago during the Precambrian period. So when the climatic conditions are extreme heat and volcanic eruptions were there, and a formation of a type of rock, right? That is called Precambrian rocks. You can see this high, big, large rocks, right? These large rocks are called Precambrian rocks. I will show a pic of it. Uh, and it's known for its uh, ancient, maybe it's so old. It's a very old rock. That's why it's millions of years ago it has evolved. And this concept of Nordicity you have to understand, especially with regard to Canadian literature. You will experience that maybe Nordicity refers to uh, the north, right, of Canada. It's a wide concept, right, developed in Canada from the 1960s that refers to the perceived, real, imagined conditions of high latitude regions. So the more we go towards the north of Canada, the altitudes are high, and how people perceived it, and the cultural practices that were prevalent in relation to the land, what's the reality of that landscape and how people perceived it, right? The imagined conditions of high latitude regions. So it deals with a variety of issues taken from both the natural and the human world. So the way they understood Canada, it may lead to a combined understanding of facts, ideas, and interventions. See, not many people ventured to the north of Canada, maybe a few. And what is their impression, maybe? The idea of landscape is not just the geographical landscape, but it is also the way people perceive that particular landscape. For you, it may be so enchanting, so beautiful, warmth, right? Or maybe it is inviting to you. So it's so cold, you cannot say warm because it's biting cold. But for some people, it may be exciting, adventurous. For some, it may be hard to survive, right? The biting cold, the weather of Canada. So people who migrated to Canada, especially from European countries, from Britain, right? They had a very unpleasant experience, I would say. Most of them had an unpleasant experience. To settle down in Canada is a Herculean task. It's That's why we associate Canada with the word survival, right? Margaret Atwood's survival. Maybe we will deal more about it, right, in our forthcoming classes. The aspect of surviving in Canada, surviving the harsh Canadian landscape, right? Surviving the harsh Canadian landscape. That is this aspect of Nordicity, the northernness of Canada, and how people perceived it, how they experienced it, right? That is what is the wide concept of Nordicity, and so many associations you can relate with it. So just get to know about this, and as we read the texts, and we will be able to relate some of these concepts like survival, Nordicity, garrison mentality. So such terms and concepts you will associate, right? Thematic concerns with regard to literature. Northrop Frye, you would have heard of Northrop Frye. He's a famous Canadian literary critic. He said, maybe he said that we are everywhere. If you look around Canada, everywhere we are haunted by the natural world. We are haunted by the natural world in Canadian literature and paintings. So, if you see, most of the Canadian writers foreground nature as a part of their writings. Nature is an important part of most of the writings of Canadian literature because they have to they have to encounter nature everywhere. You see, nature is a dominant plays a dominant role in people's mind and people's psyche, right? That's why Arthur Fire says he's a famous Canadian literary critic. We are haunted by the natural world in Canadian literature. Are you following me? Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
Can you can you see the Precambrian rocks? This is a picture of Precambrian rocks. Large mass of rocks. You have pine trees, you have maple trees in Canada. So the perception of Nordicity. As a source of strength and freedom highlighted in the national anthem of Canada. It is expressed as an illusion, a myth, or an utopia in the Canadian imagination, right? So Nordicity is part of the back of Canadian minds. Survival, 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 a thematic guide to Canadian literature, right? It's an important text. You should read the text. You should read this text if you want to understand Canadian literature. See why I'm giving you an introduction to Canadian literature. It's not just maybe for your understanding, a better understanding of Canadian literature, but also for your assignments. You have to do your assignments and projects. Maybe you may find a new writer here and there to get a comprehensive idea of what is Canadian literature. That's important. So that's why I want you to, while you select your project, your assignments. So project is different. For your assignments, maybe especially for this course, new literatures, try to select authors, the other works of the authors in the syllabus. Okay, the other works of the authors prescribed in the text. Don't just choose the same author, same works which are prescribed in the syllabus. Okay, try to just choose if Margaret Atwood's thematic guide to Canadian literature is prescribed for you. Choose Margaret Atwood's novels. You have uh, The Edible Women, right, which has feminist leanings, and the Surfacing, right, semester. You can You have to take seminar and write at least 5 to 10 pages on a particular topic. You can apply a theory or you can just make a thematic analysis. So if all of you present maybe different works of the same author or different authors, or you can also choose the authors which are not prescribed in the syllabus. I welcome that. So you get a comprehensive idea of what is Canadian literature, the themes of Canadian literature, right? So you will get a better understanding. So that's important, and I want you to work on it from today itself. So Atwood claims survivalism distinguishes Canadian literature of the Great Britain from that of the Great Britain and the United States. So dominant theme which made Canadian literature unique was that of survival. Right? Great Britain, United Nations known for its frontiers, and Great Britain, you can say, for its might and the aspect of colonialism. And there are so many things you can associate with. Australia, if you say, you can say bush landscape. And there are so many, the nature of that particular landscape. I'll be dealing with this in detail. A thematic guide to Canadian literature. If you read that, you will understand the nature of each country. For example, Canadian literature, Great Britain, and United States, what they stand for, right? If you just superficially see, right, if you compare India and Canada or Australia and America, see America, right, maybe you can see a kind of monoculture, right? But if you take India, for example, you cannot see one language, right? But if you see Great Britain and America, it's one language, one culture. Amalgamation of cultures. So superficially, you can see a lot of differences, but as well, you can see with regard to the idea of a nation, the idea of what it means to be Canadian, what it means to be American, what it means to be Britain differs, right? I'll try to make you understand in detail. Maybe when we look into Atwood survival, read that. I want you to read that so that we can discuss. You can see a distinct feature, distinct change in the attitudes, in the way they deal with the land. They have their own ethos and cultural milieu, you can say, right? And the aspect. So Canada, you have to understand, Canada is always associated with the aspect of survivalism, right? So the dominant theme which made Canadian literature unique was that of surviving the Canadian landscape, surviving the Canada, surviving the harsh Canadian landscape. Their experience or how they the fighting spirit. It's not just negative alone. The fight in Canada, and we should also right the First Nations people or the Aborigines, right, and we should talk about them. So you have selections in the syllabus. You have selections from those settlers who came to Britain. So you have a combination of both, because all these people together make Canada. Today, if you say Canada is a multicultural country, I said the metaphor of a salad bowl, right? Like a salad bowl, each culture has its own uniqueness, distinct features. Like a salad bowl, everybody is there in a multicultural country, right? Canada and Australia are today multicultural country. There are migrants from many countries, especially we have a lot of migrants from Asia as well today. So understand this multicultural nature of the new literatures. That's the newness in new literatures, the dominant newness. So winter's dominance and the north symbolize the many factors which forms the nation's characters. So the Canadian psyche, the psychology of Nordicity, has dominated Canadian art and literature, and Atwood's work surfacing best captures it. So in detail, a little more information on the climate and history of Canada. Harsh winter, long periods of winter, small periods of spring and autumn. So climate helps the Canadians in defining their identity, right? You have to understand how it on their everyday life. So the land's moves, seasons, and weathers are chronometers by which Canadians measure their lives. The tribe or the clan, anybody's coming in, they have their own identity, they have their own worldview science. Each culture, each indigenous people, they have their own worldviews. They have their own worldviews, languages, see, 12 languages, First Peoples of Canada, at least 50 cultures and 12 languages. And the way they form their identity. Have their own mythological stories. They have their own way to relate with a high spirit, maybe their ancestors, right? They have their own culture, right? They have their own hierarchies, societal hierarchies, or a network. Their network of sharing. Sharing is very important for tribal people. If you see from tribals, indigenous people across countries, it is not suitable to our commercial practice of dealing with things, but they have sharing, the idea of sharing with each other. They share whatever they hunt, they share with the entire, maybe the tribal group members. If for example, if a person has 10 children, right? If a family has 10 children, the bigger portion of the fish goes to that family. And the rest of the, maybe if who has 2 children, a family who has 2 children, the smaller portion goes to that family. See how they share. They have their own laws of hunting, laws of sharing, right? And that's an important, some of the indigenous knowledge which we can learn from these people, we can practice, and especially in addressing the ecological crisis. We can learn a lot from these people. Tribes, Amerindians, Indians, Athabaskan, diverse features, and one notable understanding I feel that we lack, the whites, the Britishers lacked this, the understanding of the natural world, right? The understanding of the natural world. Spirituality and an understanding of the natural world is important to the indigenous people. For the indigenous people, the land is sacred. Everything is sacred, right? The rivers, the lakes, they have sacred sites across the littoral zone, across the landscape, right? And especially with regard to Australian Aborigines, I would say you would have heard about the Dreamtime experience. They associate with the different sites, sacred sites. They stand there and they relate with their, maybe they experience the Dreamtime experience, communicating with their ancestors. There are sacred spaces here and there. And we call them, maybe when we will be dealing with we are going Ujjuronukal's poems, and you have this Bora ring, right? There are sacred sites, Bora rings, where the young women and the young men in their teens, they are young children. The teens are there. They are maybe made to stand there, and they are initiated into the Aboriginal, the tribal culture. They are taught the secrets of the Aboriginal life, the how to live in that landscape, the secrets of what they have learned, experienced over a period of time, the knowledge of the indigenous people, right? The particular tribe they have gained. All these secrets of living in the land, right? How to deal with the land. Everything is taught to these teens, young girls and boys, and they are made to stand a particular sacred space, and they are taught all these things over a period of time. And only after a number of Boraring ceremonies. So I'm talking especially in the context of Australian Aborigines, right? Only after uh, and after they attend a number of Boraring ceremonies, they will be able to become an adult. A hierarchy sharing. That's you can see in most of the tribes. It's common to most of the tribes. So divinity resides within all creatures, even in inanimate objects. And Europeans could not comprehend the Amerindian, the natives, and they used this knowledge to exploit the resources, right? The significance of indigenous knowledge, right? Even today, you can learn a lot from these indigenous wisdom and knowledge that's available through experience that can be applied to solve the ecological crisis. But what these people at the time of colonialism, what these whites did is they used it for commercial purposes, for trade, copper, iron. They looted all the resources for gold and spices. White explorers and settlers, native trade settlers who use natural resources for commercial purposes, right? And they destroyed all the sacred sites of these people, the natives, right? What they considered sacred, a particular space, is just a dump yard for white people because they see land as a resource, right? White people, they see land as a resource, as a commodity, something to be sold, something to be owned. For aborigines, for the natives, the indigenous people, most of the countries everywhere around, you can see they have this idea of sharing with others. It does not belong to one particular person. The land belongs to the entire tribe. Right? That kind of understanding of the land and the way they lived is completely different. And white people, they manipulated it. The colonizers, they manipulated it, and they tried to exploit it for commercial purposes. And they took all the resources to England. Right. So literary beginnings, I will start in the next class. If you have any doubts, clarifications, you can comment in the chat box. I hope you are able to follow me. Is it clear? You got an
Yes,
idea?
sir.
Canada.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I had a comment maybe 43. Sir, with mixed races in the country, would that psychology and culture change according leading to. Yes, of course, it has happened. Even the natives have changed. The natives are now eating white man's food, white man's culture. They have adapted it. Only a few of them are remaining who are still trying to stick on to their indigenous way of life. Today, in a multicultural world, everybody has changed. Everybody is moving towards the dominant materialistic culture. Of course, things have happened, but still, we hope that maybe the solution for our problems, today's problems, maybe we have a lot of solutions that can be taken from these people, their cultures, right? And hope is there because a few are still holding on to their traditions, right? Now it is museumized, right? Everywhere we see it in a museum, right? The cultures are preserved in many forms, and it is no more a living culture. Maybe a few are still living, a few indigenous people are still living. Maybe we hope that we learn, at least we learn from these people and try to adapt. Maybe you cannot do away with our materialistic, our dominant way of life, our technologically mediated way of life, but still we can try to learn something from them, and that will help us to maybe lead a sustainable way of life. That's what I can say. 7. Thank you for your points. Good points. Kurunji Mullai Mardan Neidalan.
Sir,
Okay, then take rest. I'll meet you in the next class. Yes, ma. E7. Yeah. Yes,
sir,
ma.
I have a
E7.
doubt, sir. Among these
Hmm.
two tribes which you have mentioned, sir, you mentioned the two tribes in the PPT, sir. Which is the most
Hmm.
ancient tribe, sir, among the two?
Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Right. Hmm. Yeah, there are many tribes, and these are some of the notable tribes. And even among them, there are differences in their way of life, their language, their worldviews. There are differences. Are you asking me
Okay,
which is
sir.
the oldest ancient tribe? Like
Yes,
that?
sir. Yes, sir. Old ancient tribe, sir.
No, no, I am not aware of that. Maybe all are ancient in the sense the period may differ, right? The period may differ. I think Amerindian, I suppose you can check. And what has happened is these peoples have also mixed with the Europeans. And there is a kind of mixed culture also that came up. So if you exactly, maybe roughly, I would say all these tribes are maybe 40,000 to 50,000 years ago, they have migrated to these places. Okay. The timelines may be different. We cannot exactly say. Each tribe has migrated. See, all these people have migrated from different places, right? But these indigenous people have stayed over this particular place for thousands of years, and for thousands of years they have experienced that landscape, and they have acquired a lot of knowledge and wisdom, right? Because they know how to live with that land. So that maybe I would say a rough timeline is maybe they have been in this place for thousands of years before, maybe more than 50,000 years before the settlers, the white people came here, right? So they are the real inhabitants of the land, the indigenous people. But I cannot exactly say which tribe during which period. Maybe uh, you can go and check and explore more on that. I would like to. Maybe
Okay,
that,
sir.
that becomes a more a geographical, anthropological study, right? Anthropological study, right? We should trace the history of each tribe and when they came in, right? It's a story of migration over a different period of time, right?
Okay, sir.
So you can do your own
Thank
research and
you.
find out.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks for the explanation, sir.
Welcome. Okay, shall we stop here? If you have anything to ask, you can. Thank you. Take rest. Have a good day.